Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala sayyidina Rasulullah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very first launching dialogue on Kashmir at the Middle East Institute. A little bit of brief history of Kashmir. As we all know, this has been a struggle for freedom for the last over 100 years. 1947 happens, partition takes place between India and Pakistan. The rule of thumb was the Hindu majority will go to India and the Muslim majority will go to Pakistan. Kashmir, being a Muslim majority but princely run state, was given an option whether to stay independent or join Pakistan. At that moment in time, till today, we have seen the movement of freedom have intensified. There have been some highs and low points for Kashmir, but we have not seen the resolve to the issue of Kashmir. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, India revoked its Article 370 and 35A by revoking the autonomous status, the semi-autonomous status that Kashmir has that was given under the Constitution of India was taken away. For the last 2 years, tomorrow marks the 2 consecutive years of oppression, 2 consecutive years of 1 million boots on the ground, 10 million people caged, human rights violation, suppression, oppression of human rights. Women are being raped, and it is being used as a weapon of war. So Kashmiri diaspora around the world is raising their voices. They're trying to apprise the world what's going on. But the voices of indigenous people is not being heard. So that's why we have launched this dialogue today at the Middle East Institute, while we are launching our TV channel for the people of Kashmir so that we can become the voice for the voiceless people of the region. So we are very grateful to the head of Middle East Institution right here in Washington, Dr. Marvin Weinbaum, who has allowed us to use his platform to bring the voices to the world of people who are voiceless. So we will begin this dialogue by inviting our ambassador, Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, who is joining us from Canada. He is the former ambassador who will share his brief remarks before we move on to the next speaker. So, Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazi. I think this is one of those topics which you have chosen and the kind of awareness which you are thinking to provide to the people and the world at large. This is a greatest service to the humanity, I would say. We are talking about a region which is bleeding. We are talking about the region, the people of that region are suffering. We are talking about the region which has maximum violation of the international law. We are talking about the region that is Kashmir, which has maximum human rights violation. It's not me, I'm saying. It's basically the report published by the Human Rights Commissioner in his report of 2018 and 2019. 43 pages report, the last one. It contains all what you said in your intro and in your introduction, whatever you have said, and much more. And those 43 pages, that is a neutral body, that's an international body, and that's formed under the international law. That speaks volume about it. It speaks about the rape, it speaks about the extrajudicial killing, it speaks about the forced disappearance, it speaks about internet shutdown, which is maximum in the world. It speaks about the human rights violation in terms of assembly, freedom of speech, in terms of freedom of movement, in terms of freedom of assembly, and in terms of losing life and profusely bleeding. There are so many commentators who have already lamented Kashmir region as the region of open prison, and the Kashmir region where the enactment by the Indian authorities have been made against the international laws, and I'll come in a while after a while. And how long the world can afford to this situation where the nuclear volcano, if not the flashpoint, is already been mentioned by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, by so many other entities around the world, and how long the international laws continues to be violated, how long the human miseries would continue to take place, and how long we can tolerate the proxies and hybrid war because of the situation and because of this conflict, the longest outstanding conflict of the world. How long can we pollute the international politics? How long can we infect the international organization like FATF, like IMF, and like Human Rights, like the Security Council, and so many other international platforms, the lobbying, the kind of pressure groups, the kind of extra efforts which is being made from both sides, and how long we'll see people in both countries, India and Pakistan, suffering and going below the poverty line. How long are we going to wait for the financial unsustainability of these countries? And then again, it goes down to the miseries of the people around. And how long can Pakistan be dragged into the containment of China and face the music? So all these indicators I've given it purposely. And so long as we do not, the world as a whole, do not really assert themselves through the multilateral diplomacy and, if not pressure, to implement the international law, the the Security Council resolution. And the Security Council resolution 47 is very clear. And that is the only solution. If not, then the world community can join their heads and hand together and find some other solution. You were talking in your interview about the about the violation of human rights in the region, the Kashmir region. Well, the Article 49 of the Geneva Convention is so clear about it, and that is where the disputed territory cannot be altered. And this introduction of or change in the constitution unilaterally by Indian authority without having any regard to the assembly. Assembly was already dissolved. The Kashmir Assembly, Jammu and Kashmir Assembly. So these are those violations which the world can ill afford to really tolerate, and we have tolerated it for a very long duration of time. I think we do not have much cushion to tolerate, and we have to find some. If nothing else, we should just keep in our mind or have it in front of us the two commission reports. One was in 2018, and the other one was 2019. If nothing else, we should go by the recommendation of the Human Rights Commissioner, and there where it says, if nothing else, at least they should be able to have formed the commission of inquiry, and that commission of inquiry should be able to conduct its inquiry on both sides of the Kashmir, Pakistan and India, both sides. OIC is making its recommendation that the Human Rights Commissioner report is appropriate, and it should be also read in conjunction with the UN Secretary General's report, which was submitted to the Security Council some time back. And Amnesty International also welcomes this report of the Human Rights Commissioner. Why I'm emphasizing on the report of the Human Rights Commissioner and Human Rights Commission? Because that contains everything, and that is acceptable by the international entities. If that is not done, and if we continue to violate the articles which I just mentioned, and also article of the International Law Commission draft code, crime against the peace and security of mankind, and that if we keep doing it, that is the Article 20 of this, and if we keep doing it, it tantamounts to leading the concerned parties and the concerned perpetrators of these international laws, crime of the international laws, and it takes them to the statutes of the Article 8.2 of the International Criminal Court. So all these things, what we need to do, as I said, that multilateral diplomacy and, if not pressure by the world community, is definitely needed if this problem, the most outstanding problem, the most serious problem, which had almost brought the brink, and reportedly, let me quote, I should not overemphasize the flashpoint which I just mentioned and which has been mentioned by the Prime Minister of Pakistan and so many other the leadership from both sides. Even during the Vajpayee time, the Prime Minister Vajpayee time, once the Kargil had taken place, it is reported that Prime Minister Vajpayee had conveyed to the President of the United States of that time, Mr. Clinton, that they are all ready and they are absolutely prepared to use the nukes. So in such a dangerous situation, and do we understand what does it imply if by any chance, although of course the entire world community would have all the measures to stop it, but in case human beings are human beings, the decisions are made by the human beings, both sides of the leadership. So therefore, if that happens, the disastrous situation, I have the scientific data what could happen in case if there is any flashpoint anywhere in the world. So where do we stand? I think I've taken about 7-8 minutes now, but if you want, I can continue with some more points. This is such a yeah. Are you saying something?
Go ahead. We just make the conclusive remarks, and then we will move on to the next speaker.
Okay, right. Just give me about 2 more minutes, and I'll be. So this is really heartbreaking. The United Nations report contains the school, hospitals used for the military purposes in the Jammu and Kashmir, particularly Jammu, and also the the use of pellet guns. 4,000 people have been injured, blinded. In the world, the maximum pellets ever used against human being is 1.3 million. I'm talking about the reports, which is there of the United Nations report, not anybody else's report. 1.3 million pellets used on the human beings. Imagine the disastrous effect. And the schools, UN has already verified the way schools are being used. And above all, there are the draconian laws which has been implemented in these regions. Imagine the European Union also has mentioned about Indian Chronicles, and I've mentioned about the hybrid war and as an indicator. So if this continues, where does it lead us? And this definitely leads us to more disaster, more pressure groups, more lobbying, more negative politics, international politics, and then the results of that kind is going to be disastrous. I can keep going on about giving the reference of Simla, and in nutshell, whether it's Article 33 of the United Nations Charter, Article 36 of the United Nations Charter, or Simla Conference, or all the Security Council resolutions, we have not been able to either implement it, or we have not been able to structure it in a way that both the countries, they agree to those recommendations. And if they don't, then United Nations Charter, United Nations Charter, Chapter 6 or 7 has to be implemented. If that doesn't implement it, the world should be prepared for the disastrous effect of the consequences of any conflict if it flares up. The heat is generating. The heat is generating every passing month, every passing year, and if it keeps, then it's going to flash, and that flash would engulf the entire world. It's not going to stay in that region, obviously.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you very much for your kind remarks and apprising us to the situation that's happening on the ground. We'll keep you in the background, and you can still stay tuned to our listen to our rest of the speaker as well. Thank you very much. Now I would like to request Mr. Raees Khan, who is a political activist and right activist who would be speaking for the brief moment. I would request all the speakers to cognizant of the time that we are in. So over to Mr. Raees Khan.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your time here. Today we are here for Kashmir. And when we say about Kashmir, I mean, it's really heartbreaking because since my childhood, I hear the word Kashmir, Kashmir, Kashmir. Unfortunately, India goes for Atut-ang and Pakistan goes for Kashmir for Pakistan. So the question is what the Kashmiris want and what's really going on in Kashmir. The problem is According to the United Nations resolution back in 1949, it was decided already that the people of Kashmir have to decide. It's not Pakistan and India who will stand up and say, that's our part. So unfortunately, we have to cut it out, the part of what we call it a land dispute. It's not a land dispute. We have to recognize the fact that it's an independence movement. People want independence. Now it's up to them what they want in their lives, because whether they want to join Pakistan, whether they join India, or they want to have independence. And there's a fourth group who does not care. But here's the question. Are people dying here? Yes. Are people getting injured with the pellets, guns? Yes. Can we deny the fact that there are over 1 million paramilitary forces out there to control 8 million people? Means that one person, one military personnel for every 8 people. I mean, come on. Even the Gestapos did worse than this. I mean, they're doing better or worse, whatever you want to call it. It's there was a time in 1940s when the Hitler was growing and people were not standing up. And at that time, there are a lot of people asked why? Because we are ashamed what happened. The genocide happened in Holocaust. Unfortunately, the history will remember us that we are not doing our part to bring peace to the area. Now, the question that we are asking, what we can do. I think that people of diaspora in the United States can do a lot for the people of Kashmir. We can reach out to our congressmen. We can reach out to our senators. There are so many ways. I have spoken with some people who've been in Jammu area, and it was hard for them to get out. And unfortunately, the horrific situation that they have showed us in the last 2 years, it's horrifying. Women are getting raped. They're picking up the young children. Anything above 10 years old, they're picking up and taking them to unknown locations. Parents are looking for their children. The fact is that we are not recognizing Kashmir is not a valley where the poor people live in those cubicles. It's a valley which is people live in prosperity because they have a lot of visitors. Now, for the last over 2 years, there are no visitors in the area. There's nothing going on in that area. So poverty is on the rise. That's number one issue. Number two issue is the Indian government has reduced the age of retirement for a lot of people. For the government employees, it was 60 to 50, now it's 48. Means that the person has to fight to earn next meal. It's going to increase the poverty. Poverty brings what? Horrible situation. And we are forgetting a fact. If you look at the map of Kashmir, what it's adjoining to? China, India, and Afghanistan. Who's on the rise? We couldn't control Afghanistan. So who's on the rise and on the move? Taliban's. And once you leave Taliban's, it happened in the past. They will send mujahideen to train, and they are hardcore people. It's going to just increase the violence. It's going to increase the situation in the Kashmir. Please, to the world, my request is please do not consider a problem between Pakistan and India, because if the situation remains the same, it's going to take over the world at large. We are still regretting what happened in the Hitler era. We do not want Hindutva hurting us at large. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. And it was obviously devastating to know that the age limit has been reduced for 48, and not to talk about the demography that is being changed because of the 35A revocation. And we have a whole lot to talk about. So the time is of the essence, so I would like to request Ms. Aisha Khan to come and share her remarks with us. She is a rights activist and member of Maryland Democratic Center Committee. Ms. Aisha Khan.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aisha Khan and I'm a Democratic Center State Committee member from Maryland. First of all, thank you so much, Middle East Institute, Kazi, Mr. Kazi, and Mr. Shahab Qarni, who arranged today's dialogues. Kashmir issue is a very serious issue, and I think it's a humanity issue, and humanity comes first before color, creed, and religion. I visited Pakistan in February and get a chance to meet Michelle Malik, who is the wife of Yasin Malik, and we had a conference at her residence, and we talk about the Kashmir issue, that how we can solve this. We are so blessed that we live here in Washington, D.C., and we can raise their voice on behalf of Kashmir people, especially the women and kids. They are suffering. And like Mr. Raees just mentioned, that the history we can make a history actually if we raise the voice. How we can do that? We can raise their voice in Senate and congressmen. We can contact them, and we can personal level send the letters and say that what we can do for the people of Kashmir. People like Mr. Kazi, Shahab Qarni, and you all, we can bring a change in the system, because again, this is not for Kashmir. It's a humanity issue. It's not about Pakistan and India, it's a humanity. And the Pakistan government, I would love to say thank you, because the IK, Prime Minister of Pakistan, personally taking care of this issue and raising the voice, Pakistani people raising their voice for Kashmir people. So if we can do anything from here, Washington, D.C., we definitely do, and we will raise our voice. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ms. Aisha Khan. You know, there is a saying that goes this way: the evil exists because of good people. There's a saying that goes like this: the evil exists because good people do nothing about it. So let's raise the voices for those people who are voiceless. Mr. Shahab Qarni, would you like to say a few words before I invite the guest of honor? Mr. Shahab Qarni is a political activist, has been an activist for about 30 years, dedicated to the cause of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kazi. And I definitely wanted to thank Dr. Marvin Weinbaum and his team for allowing us to host this event at Middle East Institute. I think he deserves a round of applause, please. Thank you, Professor. And again, as Ambassador Jamil Khan and Aisha and Raees Khan explain, and we're going to hear from you also, Professor. Kashmir that entire region is in a dilemma. And it's a historical kind of a tragedy for almost over 74 years now. So this is about time that this conflict needs to be resolved. And we need to hear the voices, and the decision maker at the international arena or global stage needs to give the voice to the indigenous Kashmiris. So it's not the proxies between India or Pakistan or China or US per se. It has to be the voices and the power of decision making for the indigenous Kashmiris. So we don't have that. You know, we have layers, multi-layers of proxies all over, either local or at the international level. This is going to stop, you know, because otherwise this conflict is not going to be resolved. One. The second thing is the entire Kashmir region has a potential of being a Switzerland in South Asia. And by negating their voices and destroying their will for their rights, we are missing and losing that opportunity at the global stage. So that's all I had to say. And thank you again, Mr. Kazi.
Thank you very much. Now, before I invite the Honorable Professor Marvin, I would like to say this. When I reached out to him, he was very gracious and kind enough to accept the request and accepted the invitation to join this dialogue. He is an expert on the region who handles the Afghanistan and Pakistan in that South Asia regions. Our concern, our collective concern is the letting the Taliban cut loose will have an implication in the neighboring countries, particularly in Kashmir. So he will be obviously educating us on the issue. He's a director for Afghanistan and Pakistan Studies here at the Middle East Institute. Please give him a warm round of applause and welcome him. He will share his remarks and then we'll have a Q&A. Professor, thank you very much.
It's a great opportunity to be able to speak, not just people who are gathered here today, but also to those out there who are experiencing what I think is generally recognized as one of the longest running injustices that we have witnessed internationally. I'm speaking now as an outsider. And so I want to say just a few words which may be a little different. But as an outsider who has lived through this period very much of the history of this conflict, what saddens me is that we are by and large saying those things which have to be said for all these years. And I say it's saddening because if anything has changed over this time, certainly our rhetoric hasn't. We've accumulated more and more information about the injustices that have been perpetrated. And I think that we've done as good a job as we might have, although let me say that this new channel will be very valuable to bring to the attention of the international community what is going on. Regrettably, the response has not been a good one. Even those countries that might have been expected to stand up as Muslim countries for the people of Kashmir have not delivered. In fact, they've established ever stronger relations with India, which, while they have not encouraged India on its Kashmir policy, has certainly not discouraged them. So I'm very conscious of the fact now that, again, as an outsider, how can this change? Is there another strategy here? Because this is not about Pakistan and India. This is about Kashmiris and their well-being. And we often lose sight of that because, unfortunately, both India and Pakistan have sometimes made it an issue between them. And in the process, the Kashmiris got left out. All of these discussions that have been going on between India and Pakistan, and there have been some peace plans out there that have been created, and they're some very equitable ones. But they've not led to anything, unfortunately, mostly because there were spoilers on both sides. For whatever reason, did not necessarily want to see this happen, and in fact did not want to see an independent Kashmir, to give Kashmiri people at least the choice. So I throw really out to you, do we have any new strategies? Because yes, even armed conflict has backfired. It's backfired not because brave people haven't been willing to stand up, and great losses here, but it's backfired because it's created, unfortunately, in the international community, an equating of freedom fighting for terrorism. And this has been the strongest thing which has weighed here on the inability here to make greater progress. What has really changed in this time is 370, the revocation of 370. It's made things, we all know that, it's made things so much more difficult. And the accession to power of Modi's party, BJP, has been part of this. So I'm wondering here whether, in spite of what I said here about India and Pakistan, whether progress has to wait a little longer for a change in the relationship between India and Pakistan. A relationship where this is no longer an issue, where freedom of movement and expression is acceptable. I don't want to take Kashmir off the front burner here as an issue, but it's going to have to share the burners with an effort here to do those things which have to be done between India and Pakistan. Trade, yes, free movement of people, cultural exchange, but also new issues which have arisen, which have an impact on everyone, especially perhaps the Kashmiris. Climate change, terrorism in general, global terrorism. So again, I don't have the answers, but we need now to think of new approaches which can not see Kashmir as the key necessarily to everything falling into place. It hasn't happened. What can we do which would redound to the benefit of the Kashmiri people, such that, and I hope this isn't heretic, to say it doesn't matter where you live, whether you live in an independent state, in Pakistan or in India. What matters here is that the people of this region who have suffered so greatly can be free, can live their lives fully. Well, again, no answers here, but we need to reset our thinking here and say what now is going to work that hasn't worked in the past, because we've said it so eloquently here and elsewhere all the time. We've made a perfect case, but we haven't won over. What ways can we have? What ways can we change the whole context for this so that progress is possible? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Stay there because we may have a few questions. See if you can answer those questions.
Okay.
I would be the first one to ask this question. You have mentioned that there have been some highs in those points where the Kashmir, the perfect case was made. In certain instances, at the time of General Musharraf, we saw the 4 points.
Yes.
That was, Kashmiri thought that would be probably a step forward.
Yes.
Then we were pushed back so far back, and then in our last president, Trump made a comment when the Prime Minister of Pakistan was here, and he said, I will mediate between India and Pakistan. And the Kashmiri raised their hopes, thinking that the only power breaker in the world, that is USA, will be probably negotiating and finding some resolve for the people of Kashmir. And that didn't happen. Then February 22nd happens, and President Biden makes a comment that we will remain impartial, neutral. Now, in your research, in your study, what do you think that where and how Kashmiri could knock the doors of the people, of the powers, if they keep playing these kind of emotional games with us.
Well, when then President Trump said, we want to become involved, we heard him say that, but the rest of the sentence was the critical thing here. He said, if the parties agree to it. Yeah. Well, that's been the problem all along. India has not budged. And as I say, it's taken steps backward. You mentioned here the Musharraf 4-point open borders. That's been the boldest move that we have seen. And it was essentially bureaucracies on both sides which undercut that. And he was left out on a limb. And he paid a price for it, for having. But there have been promising statements from Pakistan. General Bajwa issued a sense here that we've got to establish a new approach here in our relationship with India, with Kashmir in mind. But then he said, but we're not going to pursue this until Kashmir is settled. Well, that's the point. If Kashmir is settled, then it's not an issue anymore. And then Imran Khan, when he came in, suggested that he's ready to reset relations. Other issues have intruded, particularly, of course, the revocation of 370. So that hasn't been a way forward. So there have been opportunities here, and that's what it's going to take. Whether we can make progress with this regime in India or not, I don't know. Certainly it's hard to be optimistic in that regard, but we can't give up. Yes, please.
Well, very nice answer, very good answer. But I would think that it's going to be. I would think there's a political answer. But here's a question that I'll ask you, because since Hindutva, the Hindu extremism is on rise in India, and rise of Taliban in Afghanistan, I foresee, because I have seen the Afghan conflict during the Soviet era, I have seen CIA headquarters in my town for the world, I have seen things firsthand. Based on that, I mean, do you see a resolution to it? Because what I see is that if Hindutva will not gonna back out, if the extremism will not gonna go down in India, and then Taliban on rise, I mean, we can see another insurgency within the area, because if you look at it, I was talking about the map. I mean, if you look at it, all they need to be Afghanistan mountains, into Pakistan mountains, into Gilgit-Baltistan, Kashmir, right there. And they have proven it in the past, and that's what I see, because it may cause a conflict on a full-fledged war between India and Pakistan. And it's been mentioned that if it's going to be a war, it's going to be subsequent issues for the rest of the world. No matter what we want to do at that point, I think it can be too late. So what do you think?
Yeah. Let me say that there are some developments here which lead one to be concerned as you are. If the Afghan Taliban, should they come to power, I think it's almost certain that they're going to lend support to the TTP, to the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. It's almost certain that they are. And if this succeeds here in something which is already there, in Talibanizing Pakistan, we have to remember that jihadi groups who have supported Kashmir, for most of them, it's less about Kashmir than it is about India. Kashmir is just a means there. If you listen to the rhetoric closely, is a way to free. Now, this is the great nightmare of the Indians. It's the one thing that really scares the Indians, that the Muslim population of India will become a fifth column. This is very concerning. And I don't think enough people recognize here, because the danger of Pakistan becoming destabilized now by what happens in Afghanistan is very, very probable. And that will increase tension between India and Pakistan, and that certainly doesn't help Kashmir. So Kashmir, once again, may simply get caught in the middle of larger forces that are at work.
Professor, I have a question. That don't you think that this outstanding conflict between India and Pakistan has something to do with the war economy, and both of the military establishment, India and Pakistan, are using Kashmir as a cash cow?
Well, look, the accusations have been made, certainly in Pakistan, that the military loses its raison d'etre if there is not an issue within India. Well, I think I'd see that as too simplistic, really. I think that that there has in the military, from what I can see, there has developed here a sense here that Pakistan has changed. The Pakistan of the 90s, when you could welcome perhaps a Taliban success in Afghanistan because of the fact that it perhaps would take care of the India problem. And we have to remember this, that that the Afghans have gravitated towards India only because, really, they have always, since 1947, they've looked for a counterweight. They've a counterweight to Pakistan, to the extent that Pakistani-Afghan relations improve, the Afghans don't need the Indians. The idea that somehow, if there was a friendly regime in Kabul, it could alleviate this problem. Fears of India is very real. I guess what I'm getting at here is that there has got to be here willingness to see this in a larger frame. That the Kashmir issue, as important as it is, cannot stand on its own. It is wrapped up with what is going on in the emerging circumstances in South Asia. And that kind of understanding, I think, is going to be necessary here to, as I said before, to think in terms of finding new terms, finding new approaches here, again, with the thought in mind, what is in the best interest of Kashmiris.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Professor. Really appreciate your time, and absolutely great.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all we have for today. I want to thank all the audience, panelists, and the members, speakers who have shared their valuable views and remarks with us on this Kashmir. I hope this would not be the last dialogue that we would have. We will continue doing this